is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Fire and Hemlock by Diana Wynne Jones. Part 2, chapters, I believe, 6, 7, and 8. Forgive me, it's kind of hard to tell. But this episode was brought to you by Patricia Bing Grant again. And she emailed me to warn me that I might not want to cover this because it's emotional. And she was not kidding. Prepare for tears on camera and mic again, folks. Welcome to Spoil Me. Whew. All right. Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Natasha. And this was brutal. I don't know how many people listen to my Spoil Me podcasts without having read the book. I know that happened the other day with one of my other shows. I think it was when I did Iron Druid. Somebody was in the audience in chat who had not read it yet. But these few chapters deal with the absolute abandonment of your child. And I want somebody to tie a rock around Ivy's feet and throw her off a bridge. And I want somebody to put her father's picture on the news with a complete, a piece about what a giant fucking coward he is. And just shame the shit out of him. These two people deserve each other, and they should not be divorcing because they totally fit together because they're both garbage, and I hate them. And I want them to die in fires or, some other appropriate punishment. So yeah, welcome. So chapter 6. For a long time, Polly waited in real terror for Mr. Leroy to carry out his threats, but nothing seemed to happen. Mr. Lynn did not send her a Christmas present, but that was the only unusual thing. So she starts to compile some tales of nowhere. She made a list of all the things she and Mr. Lynn had made up, then she drew a map of nowhere. She did a tracing of a real map of the Cotswolds and gave the places different names except for Stow on the Water. This seemed right for the way nowhere was supposed to mix with real life. It rather pleased her to write Dragon over the farm where Mary Fields lived. I am all kinds of curious about that, everybody. What is that about? Is Mary the dragon? Or is she part of the dragon, or is there a dragon on the property that she's in cahoots with? I like the word cahoots. But yeah, I just don't. That one really caught me off guard. If I was going to put Mary Fields into a story and make her into some kind of analog character, a dragon wouldn't even occur to me. So that's interesting. And then its next thing was to paint illustrations and then to write it. This part of the plan went very slowly. Well, Polly, welcome to the club. Writing takes forever. You will never be happy with it, and it will plague your life. Welcome. Welcome to the club. Nina has filled out and become a rather, what's the word I want? A pinup type with her weight settling in more appropriate places and then dwindled to make a most attractive shape. She looked good and knew it. And she starts to get pretty boy crazy, which, I had said earlier that Nina reminded me of me a lot when I was, not even when I was a kid, but she reminds me of me now, the descriptions of her. And this reminds me of this reminds me of myself also. When I finally started to realize that I looked good and I was like, you know what? I want to sleep with literally everybody. I was like all about it. And I only had the one like pretty steady boyfriend through all of high school. I think we broke up one time. But yeah, I was pretty boy crazy. I managed to hide some of it pretty well, but I'm pretty sure that if I had let myself a little more loose, I could have gotten quite a reputation, which is fine. So then she starts to become more friendly with Fiona, who her name is Fiona Perks. It's a shame she started so early. What will she have left to do when she's an old woman of 15? Polly liked that remark. It was the kind of thing Granny said. Nina has to be where the action is, she explained. She always did. I like that response too. It's not even like a judgment about who, like, what she's doing or, you know, the value of sex or self-respect. There's nothing like that. It's more about like, well, you know, she always wants to be in the thick of things, which that's a really good way of looking at it and putting it and understanding what's probably really going on here. Nina likes to be the first to like plunge into new stuff. And there is nothing newer when you start to reach this age than sex. Like, that's the thing that nobody knows about yet, and everybody's starting to, like, get more interested in. But, there's always going to be one person that, like, knows more and does more right away and then can report back to friends. And that was who I was, definitely in high school. My circle of friends was not really very promiscuous at all. And I was the first one to have sex and the first one to, like, really talk openly about it. And so I was the one they'd all come to with like questions about it and stuff like that. Not that I particularly knew what I was even talking about a lot of the time, but you know. And Fiona is, you know, she's trying to become better friends with her, but Polly is feeling a little weird about it because she went over to Fiona's house and it was really nice. But her own house not only is not as nice, but it's phrased as things had become really difficult there. Ivy had decided David was deceiving her. Their Christmas holidays seemed to have done very little good. Sacrifice in vain, Polly thought bitterly. They could have come to the pantomime for all the good it did. Now, whenever David was out, Ivy telephoned all the people she knew and asked them where David was. One day, Polly came in from school to find the kitchen a white fog from the kettle, and Ivy, red in the wet heat, busy steaming David's letters open. I know, I'm insecure, but he's so secretive. How can I trust a man who doesn't tell me anything? This made things awkward for Polly because she was still taking notes from David to Mr. O'Keefe. Yeah, this is where it really gets fucked up on David's part, because he knows what Polly's mom is going through. And I'm not even judging him for continuing to gamble, which is apparently it is what's been going on. I'm judging him for putting Polly in the middle of this at this point. Like, he's aware. There's no way he's not aware. It doesn't say it in the text, but I'm sorry. There's no way he doesn't know how crazy Ivy is starting to go. And there's no reason to continue putting her daughter in the middle of this, except that you're afraid of getting caught, which is super cowardly. So I'm judging David now. Like, at first I was kind of like, well, you know, Ivy's tough to deal with. But there really reaches a point where it goes from being tough to deal with to like, now you need to do something about it, because this is more than tough to deal with. This is turning into like a full-fledged mental health problem here, where she's growing paranoid. And she was cheated on by, what's her father's name again? Reg. And I'm not even convinced that Reg didn't cheat on her with more than one person. So I can understand being paranoid. But as we see shortly, Ivy believes some other shit's happening. So Polly gets a package finally, and it's a book. Hey, said Polly, that's mine. It's from Mr. Lynn. Ivy's answer was to thrust the half-open parcel across the kitchen table at Polly. Is it? She said. Then show me. Open it right out. Go on. Under Ivy's suddenly ominous stare, Polly rather resentfully finished undoing the brown paper. It was a fat book called The Golden Bough. The typed slip of paper with it said it was from Mr. T. Gell. Polly grinned, but her pleasure was a good deal spoiled by Ivy taking the book by its covers and shaking it, then spreading the brown wrapping out to make sure there was no other message. "It's all right, Mum," she said. "I know it's from Mr. Lynn. That's the way he always does it." "Yes, but I don't know, do I?" Ivy said. "Where does it say it's from him?" And she tells her it makes a good story, said Ivy. "What do you mean?" said Polly. Mr. Lynn, said Ivy. "You may be always on about this Mr. Lynn of yours, but I don't believe he exists. I've never set eyes on him." "Yes, you have," Polly cried out. "In London the first time you went to the lawyer." "No, I did not," said Ivy. "You went by yourself in a taxi, as you well remember. You always were a sly little devil, even in those days. I can see now that you went to meet Reg behind my back." And I love this moment. Polly felt horrible for a moment. She wondered if Ivy had gone mad. But she felt so hurt and bewildered that she thought Ivy must be quite normal. If a person is mad, they cannot say things that hurt you. Oh, wow. That's so untrue and so fucking sad. Here we go, guys. Buckle up, because it only gets worse from here. Granny's met him, ask her. She'd only stick up for you. It's no use asking her. She spoils you rotten, just like she did your father, and I reap the reward. So not only are David and Polly conspiring against her, which, to be fair, they a little tiny bit are, just not to the degree that she thinks, but also her grandma is conspiring. And everybody basically is on... And what kills me is remembering how Granny has stuck up for Ivy in the past and tried to tell Polly, like, you know, don't be too hard on her. She's dealing with a lot. And just generally trying to, like, give Ivy the benefit of the doubt and even admiring a little bit that she's making such an effort in getting her life together. So we know that Granny has, like, really gone out of her way to not talk shit about Polly's mom to her. Like, she's been way more of an adult about this than anybody in this book, frankly. But no, she's part of the conspiracy now. And let's see, if I didn't give it her, I didn't give it to her. If that's what you mean, it's that admirer fellow again. "I know it was supposed to be," Ivy said grimly. "My lady here has it all set up for you, doesn't she? She makes herself up this story about this man who doesn't exist. No doubt she believes it. She doesn't know truth from lies, just like her father. Then you step in and start sending her presents, pretending they come from her Mr. Nobody." Oh, God. This whole thing. And then she does her trump card. "I saw you taking your love letters for that Irishman to hand on." "Just the odd pound on the dogs, Ivy," David said. He would have done better to have denied everything. The resulting row seemed to shake the house. David got as angry as Ivy and roared that he was not going to stand for being spied on. Ivy screamed that he had reduced her to it by ganging up with Polly. David yelled he did not care two hoots about Polly. Ivy accused both him and Polly of lying. Polly, in tears by now, tried to make at least David believe that Mr. Lynn had sent her the book, and that made Ivy angrier than ever, and she sent Polly away upstairs. Polly defiantly grabbed the golden bough off the kitchen table as she went, at which Ivy screamed, "Yes, take your ill-gotten gains. Much good may they do you." This bitch. I swear to God. So she's on her bed, and then Ivy comes up, and she tries to show her the letters that Mr. Lynn sent her, and, like, never mind the fact that she was getting notes and letters from Mr. Lynn before David was even in the picture. That's not even brought up, which I understand. I'm not blaming Polly for not bringing that up, because, frankly, she should not be in this position in the first place. She's under no obligation to explain this shit to her mother. Like, that's just, she's crazy. Tell all the lies you like in your own mind. It's when you tell them to me that it matters. You've destroyed my happiness with David. You've made him secretive too. Y'all, I can't have it, Polly. You'll have to leave. "Leave," said Polly. She did not understand. "Leave," said Ivy. "It's my only chance of mending things with David. I had this letter from your father a while ago. Read it. He wants you to live with him and Joanna in Bristol. So there you'll go as soon as school ends. You and Reg should see eye to eye. He believes what he wants to believe, too." This is really hard to read, guys. And I want to emphasize that I know for a fact that this happens. I have known people this happened to. Parents who kind of lost their shit and decided that their child was to blame for them not being happy. Blamed their child and sent them away. And this, I discussed this during another episode of Spoil Me, and I can't remember if it was on this show or another, where there's incidents of, kids being abused, and especially when it's girls being abused by a stepfather, the mother telling the daughter that she is trying to steal her husband or otherwise misbehaving on purpose, and that she wanted the abuse and that it's part of her weird plan to get affection and attention. And then deciding, I have to get rid of my daughter, the victim of a fucking child molester, because she's ruining my happiness with my awesome husband. Which is I just don't understand the mindset of being with a man that would be tempted by a child in the first place and wanting to keep him. That's just doesn't compute for me at all. There's nothing there that makes sense. Not a bit of it. And so this, when she's saying this, and I'm well, at least she has her dad to go to. Guys, I am reading this really heartbreaking passage to you right now, and this isn't even the worst fucking part. This isn't even the worst part. Ivy, stony and distracted, hurried Polly to the station on her way to work. The train went early, and Ivy had forgotten to go to the bank the day before. She had to buy Polly's single ticket to Bristol with her credit card. "Have you got any money?" she asked Polly irritably. "Not much," Polly said. "Well, you won't need much except on the train. Your father will be paying for you after this." Polly cried out in a sudden spurt of anxiety. "But, Mum, suppose he doesn't want me?" "Then you can make the best of it," said Ivy. "You're not coming back here." She put Polly on the train and went away without waiting to see if Polly found a seat. Y'all, I'm not even going to cry right now, I swear, because I have to save it for when it's going to be even worse. So she's reading on the train. She gets picked up by her dad. He's gotten thinner and his hair has gone entirely white. And he is putting on a good show of being cheerful and making chatter with her. But there's something that kind of keeps on niggling at her. And finally she realizes a little bit later that he hasn't said anything about her living there. And this doesn't really come up until the next day when they go to the zoo. But this is so okay. So they got off the bus at a place where there were big square built houses made of blocks of pinkish stone. Polly thought at first they were walking to the house where Dad lived, but after they had been along the same road twice, she realized they were just walking about. Dad talked happily, and they waited until it got dark and Polly started to shiver. At length, Dad looked at his watch. "I think Joanna should have recovered from work now," he said. So this motherfucker is letting her get home and get ready and not letting his daughter in the house. Even though when they arrive, Joanna doesn't seem surprised to see Polly. So it's not like he didn't tell her Polly was coming at all. Apparently he told her. But he's still so afraid that he can't bring her. He doesn't want her in the house when Joanna gets home. They have to let Joanna get home and get her domain in place. "How nice to meet you at last, Polly," Joanna said. She said it in a cool, social sort of way, as if Polly had only dropped in for a cup of tea. Yeah. Yeah, so I like to keep things nice, Joanna said. Reg wants a cat, but I've told him we can't. Cats make almost as much mess as children do. Polly started to assure Joanna that she would try very hard not to make a mess, but Joanna was gone by then. Guys. Yeah, all right. I'm sorry, I keep putting this off because I just don't want to get to this part. Are we going to show Polly Bristol? Shall I take the day off work tomorrow? No, said Dad hastily. I know what a brute your boss is. I'll take the day off and show her. Polly did not sleep well that night. The visitor's couch was not comfortable, and she felt strange, agitated, and peculiarly uneasy. Something was odd somewhere. Something was not quite right. From the way Joanna behaved, it seemed almost as if she thought Polly were only here on a short visit. But surely that couldn't be true. Dad must have told her that Polly was living here now. Or had Mum not explained to Dad properly? That could be it. Ivy had written to Dad, but in her stony mood, she did not always say things completely. And Dad was not behaving as if he thought Polly was here for good either, in which case how awkward it was going to be to explain. So she's blaming her mother here, which, don't get me wrong, she should, but she's thinking Mom didn't explain it right, and so Dad doesn't understand. Because since her mother is clearly crazy, she has decided everything her mother says about her dad must also not be true. And sadly, it seems like her mother has a pretty good measure of her dad in a lot of ways. As we find out later, it's just that she doesn't find this out for herself. And this was a really compelling moment to me. But we'll get to it. These thoughts made Polly feel so strange that she unpacked the stolen photograph from her bag in the dark. She did not like to turn on the light in case she fell over a broom or the ironing board and disturbed Dad and Joanna. But she gripped the little oval frame in her hand as she wriggled back among the lumps in the couch, and it was somehow comforting. She fell asleep clutching it. I'm dying to know who this is of, guys. I really want to know. Next morning, she tried to ask Dad and Joanna straight out if they knew she was living with them now. She tried several times, but she never seemed to get further than, "Do you know?" So they go to the zoo. I seem to be in awful trouble to you and Joanna. That's because Joanna hasn't settled down and got to know you yet, Dad interrupted quickly. Give her time. And finally, she says something like, she's happy about the zoo and says, I'm going to come here often and often. I hope so, Dad said, rather soberly and devoutly. The way he said it made Polly anxious again. Do you know which school I'll be going to in Bristol? She asked, trying to sound casual. Dad laughed. That's a knotty problem in this town, he said. Let's not worry about that for the moment. Plenty of time when we've all settled down. Polly's uneasiness came back at that and grew. It went on growing all through the day, interesting though the day was. They had a snack at the zoo and then went to see one of the first ever iron ships. And then when they went back to the flat they stayed outside, walking about until Joanna had time to recover from work. Polly looked back to the old days and knew that Dad was very nervous about something. As soon as she knew that, her uneasiness flooded everything else, blotting through all her other feelings like spilled bleach. Her throat felt like a sore white tunnel of shame. Dad hasn't told Joanna, she thought. He didn't tell her I was coming, and he hasn't told her I'm here for good. But it did not seem possible. Dad was not like that. It was only Mum who said he was secretive. She came back and set a glass of yogurt in front of Polly. Polly, she said, without wanting to pry, is there any chance of you telling us how long this visit of yours is going to go on? The phrasing of that, you guys. How long this visit of yours is going to go on. Not any inclusion of herself in that. Not that she's interested at all. Not that she's hosting, really. And it's going to go on like it's this interminable thing. Reg and I do have to go out tomorrow night, as it happens. Shame bleached Polly right through. She knew for certain that Dad had not told Joanna. He had simply hoped, or made himself believe, that Joanna would take to Polly, and Joanna hadn't. Oh, that's all right, she said brightly without even having to think. I'm going tomorrow morning. What time train? Joanna asked almost eagerly. Polly glanced through her hair at her father. There was profound and utter relief on his face. 10 o'clock, she invented. She was drowning in bleach. That look on Dad's face. Mum had been right about him after all. Then we can all leave here together, Joanna said. If we go really early, I'll have time to drive you to the station. A bleached kind of pride rose through Polly's shame. That's perfectly all right, she said. I can easily find my own way. Then it's all settled, Reg said heartily. What shall we do this last evening? And then here comes the part that really made me cry. In the morning, Joanna's racing through her routine. I'm afraid I haven't time to pack sandwiches, she said to Polly, but you can get something to eat on the train, can't you? Of course she can, Reg said. Hurry up, Paul, we have to get to work. Polly nibbled some nutty brown toast she did not want, and then the other two were racing her out of the flat. Outside in the road, Reg waved goodbye to her as he and Joanna hurried to where the car was parked. Polly was left standing on the pavement with her duffel bag hooked on one shoulder. She turned and walked the other way. Her pride would not let her stand and watch the car drive away. She heard it drive off as she reached the end of the road. Then, when it was too late, she remembered that she had no money and no ticket back to Middleton. And he never even asked me if I had, she thought. She knew it was her own fault, too. She had been too bleached with pride to remember. But she also knew that Dad had not asked her about money because that was part of the pretense that she was only here for a short visit. Naturally, she would have a return ticket and spending money for her stay. All right. Here it comes. Y'all, this little girl is watching the bad behavior. Bad doesn't even cover it. Unconscionable, inexcusable, despicable behavior of her father. And she's thinking to herself that she knows it's a little bit her fault too. Yep, that seems right. It's so hard to read. And I remember I would see movies and stuff where kids' parents got divorced and the kid would be like, "Are you divorcing because of me?" And I never felt that way. I could tell my parents were just not good together, and that when they were fighting or when they were talking about maybe divorcing, it was not about me at all. That said, when individual shit would happen, be forgotten, overlooked, whatever, I would get upset and then chastise myself for not being more understanding. That they had a lot to deal with. They had jobs. We had money problems. They were stressed. And excuse their behavior while saying that I really should have foreseen that this was a problem. That if I wanted this thing so bad, I should have taken it upon myself. That how could they know? How like the number of excuses that you can make for people that you love and depend on is staggering, frankly. And when you're this small and they are so sincerely convinced that you can completely take care of yourself. She's what, like 13? Then you start to wonder, if I can't take care of myself and they're so sure I can, maybe that's my problem. Maybe if I don't live up to their expectations of self-sufficiency, that's evidence that I'm actually subpar somehow. That if I can't do this, I'm showing my weakness Or I will disappoint them. Never mind that they've disappointed you already. They've only disappointed you because you had unrealistic expectations of them. They've only disappointed you because you were being kind of selfish. And if you just put yourself in their shoes, maybe you'd get it. And then something like this will happen. And it's enough to make you see that you're not being unreasonable. But it's not enough to completely overcome that part of you that blames yourself. You get to this weird place where you're like, okay, you know what? No, this is outright not okay. And I can see that now. But outright not okay, there's still a voice in your head that's like, yeah, but I should have expected this by now. I should have been ready for this. Because they've inched so close to disappointing me like this before. I should have known it was coming and been ready. And the fact that I am not ready is I only really have myself to blame for that. So this man leaves his tween daughter alone on the sidewalk with no money and no ticket and runs off with his girlfriend and could not care any less. Is so relieved when she takes it upon herself to say that she's leaving at dinner and saves him face. She's feeling shame for something that is not her responsibility at dinner. So much shame that she feels like she can barely speak for something her father did. And she covers for him. Because she's afraid to get him in trouble. And the next day, even when she's thinking, I can't believe he didn't give me any money, I should have asked. Then the next thought is, I couldn't ask because it would ruin the lie. She's more worried about that and keeping up the pretense for his sake than she is about actually taking care of herself. And this is one of those things that, like, I know in the background of my mind, I know her gran is there. Does not matter at all. Her gran is not nothing. There are plenty of kids that wind up in situations like this that don't have a grandma, don't have anybody, and they just wind up going back and forth between places that they're not wanted. But they're not your parents. They're not the ones that are supposed to be there. They're not the ones that are supposed to give a shit. And it's just so hard to read and understand what she's thinking. And like, even the description of her looking at the photo in the middle of the night to comfort herself. She's super careful about going to get it out of her bag and not disturb her dad or Joanna. Like, she's so aware of what a nuisance she is to everybody that she is trying to make herself smaller and smaller and smaller. And you can only really do that for so long before it feels like you've disappeared. And this is a moment in which she feels like she's disappeared. He doesn't care. Patricia says, or the ones that used to care for her. That loss of something you once had is hard too. And that, like, it's hard to know because when we start this story, Ivy is already not doing great. So I know that she had a better relationship with her dad, but it feels like that was at the expense of Ivy's, like, state of mind, because there was some shit going down that she didn't understand until now after seeing what her dad can pull. And I'm just really wondering, has she ever felt like they cared for her? Like, really? Because it seems like a lot, like, while this behavior has certainly gotten worse, exponentially worse, it doesn't seem like it's entirely new. Like, I don't know. She was staying with her grandma a lot already. And that's not something that's super normal. Like a kid being sent off to stay with her grandma constantly. It's a weekend thing, whatever. But this is different. Staying with your grandma on like school days too, especially that. So she is really in this way of like not knowing what the hell she's going to do. And she even like goes to this bridge and stands up there and thinks about a story her dad told her of a woman who tried to commit suicide, but she had on these huge hoop skirts and that acted as a parachute and saved her life. And she thinks to herself, she thought about the parachute crinoline lady and wondered if something like this had happened to her too. So finally, she is walking and she is pretty sure she sees Mr. Leroy. And she decides that Mr. Leroy is like responsible for this situation, which is an interesting way to go. Honestly, at this point, I don't put anything past Mr. Leroy. I don't think that's the case, but I wouldn't be surprised either. But also, like, if Mr. Leroy is trying to keep her away from Mr. Lin, robbing her of her parental relationships doesn't seem like that would be the most efficient way to accomplish that. There was a notice pasted up at the end of the bridge. Samaritans, it said, and a telephone number. But Polly had no money to telephone, and if she begged money off someone and rang them up, the first thing they would do would be to get a hold of Dad. It would be the same if she explained at the railway station or went to the police. They would get Dad, and he would be exposed, and so would Polly's shame. And Joanna's eyes would open so wide. See? Still, she can't bear to expose her dad. Like, oh my God. So, finally, she sees the notice for the Dumas Quartet, and she sees Mr. Lin's car. And there's an interesting moment. It says she was following a tugging in her head. It was like an instinct, the way migrating birds go or salmon swim, sure and unhesitating to the right place in the end. It took her round in a devious U-turn back through the small streets under the graph paper buildings. So the doors of the hall were shut. Polly knew at a glance she could not get in that way. She only turned her eyes sideways to make sure and to read the notice and walked on without pausing so that Mr. Leroy would not know, uphill and round the side, a way she could not have found without her instinct, and arrived at a side door which was not quite shut. And here follows a lovely meeting of all of the different people in the quartet, which is so... Anne Abraham, Sam Rensky, Ed Davies. The three faces broke into friendly, recognizing smiles. They know all about me, Polly thought in amazement, looking from Anne's frank friendliness to Ed's twinkle and on to Sam's great gloomy grin. She almost felt as if she knew them too. Oh my God. Just the fact that he's talked about her to them is like enough to make her feel like I wish I could talk without crying. It would be super. And she hangs out with them while they practice. Mr. Lin offers to phone her grandma and drive her to the station and get her a ticket back. And they all pool money so that she can, like, buy something to eat on her way home. And that should not be enough to make me cry. Except that, and it's enough to make her almost cry. Like, she, like, almost loses it when they all do that. You guys. Anyway, and there's a line while she's listening to them practice. You might have thought he was mad if you had not known he was living the lovely sounds he and Ed were making. Bright, sharp streaks of sound, Polly thought. If you were able to hear lime juice, it would sound like violins. That's a pretty fun line. I don't entirely agree. In my opinion, lime juice is chimes. And I would think that violins would be something like orange juice, something sweeter, apple juice even. But yeah, that was a fun way to think about that. So they head out. Oh, God. I'm sorry, this moment. Each of them gave Polly a pound. She was so grateful she almost cried again. It's nothing, Anne said. We happen to have it. You don't. I'll see to the cello, Tom. Listen, this woman, I love her. She's great. Can she be Polly's mommy, please? And I love that when they're on their way out, Polly kind of asks about whether or not he's interested in Anne. Do you think you might marry Anne? Not a hope, Mr. Lynde said cheerfully. Anne has her own ideas about such things. What a shame. He's going to stay with the dragon, I guess. So they're walking and trying to find his car. And as they're walking, their paper and old leaves tumbled gently along behind them, which sounds perfectly innocent initially. It makes me think, said Polly, what happens to all the people who don't have someone like you they know? God knows, he said very soberly, and they walked the rest of the way down that street without speaking. The rubbish pounced and pattered behind them in the wind, almost like little creatures running after us, Polly thought, in a dreamlike way. Almost! And they're still looking for his car. It doesn't seem to be where they thought it was. They wind up down like a whole other street. Polly turned too against the wind. Oh, this part. Okay, I love this because he sees it before she does. I'm sorry, I'm wiping my nose because I was crying and now my nose is running. At the end of the street, they were among the graph paper towers and the wind was fierce. This is wrong, Polly said. It was in an old street. I know. This is the most confusing town I've ever been in. Mr. Lynde turned round to go back up the old street. Polly felt him go stiff. I think we'll keep on going the way we were going, he said carefully. Polly turned, too, against the wind and looked back up the street. Her dreamlike feeling at once became the feeling of pure nightmare. For a moment, as you do in nightmares, she could not move. In the middle of the dark little street, the pattering rubbish was slowly piling upon itself, floating slowly and deliberately into a nightmare shape. It could have been a trick of the wind, but it was not. It was too deliberate. Plastic cups, peanut packets, leaves, old wrappers were winding upwards, putting themselves in place as parts of a huge bear-like shape. As Polly watched, a piece of newspaper rose like a slow ghost to make the creature a staring face. Tom seized her wrist while she stared and pulled her away among the tower buildings. They did not exactly run, but they went in long strides as fast as they could walk. Both of them kept looking back. The creature of rubbish was following, billowing on pattering man-like legs. This is something, you guys. I was not prepared. Like that. This is the thing about this story. It goes from like really real life human moments of like just kind of tragedy in a way. And then it goes to like serious magic moments like this where I'm just like, what is happening? A lot of people were there, heads down against the wind, hurrying, so the place was full of banging feet. The creature of rubbish came after them faster here, traveling in swoops, changing shape as it traveled. Polly could see the thing more clearly every time she looked. But nobody else can see it. So it's coming, nobody else can see it. It's gathering up more like trash and stuff as it's heading for them. And getting larger and larger and larger. And they're trying to find his car. Oh my God. Tom took Polly's wrist and dragged her over that way. and then retreated hurriedly as the newspaper face and a storm of small rubbish rose billowing and reaching for them. As they backed round the corner again, Polly caught a glimpse between the spaces of it of a dark, bulky figure standing watching against a lighted shop window. "Mr. Leroy." "Yes," Mr. Lynn said. "I know." It was that quiet manner of his that ran you up against silence. So they finally find the car. He begins, he jumps in and they hit the gas really hard. "Hold on, I'm going to drive through it," Tom said. It was one of those times when heroic driving might pay off, Polly thought dizzily. They hurtled at the thing of paper and leaves. Blue, orange, and red paper whirled in the lights, a solid thickness, and the great white paper face seemed to stoop at them, so real that Polly almost saw eyes in the crumpled eye holes. It was too real. "Tom!" she screamed. "Ian Hanovar!" Mr. Lynn swore and dragged the steering wheel round. Polly had an instant slow-motion glimpse of Sam Rensky sliding sideways off the car bonnet along with a cloud of little glass cubes from the windscreen. On the other side, there was Ed Davies with his mouth open yelling, "Tom, what the hell?" Polly heard faintly through the hole in the windscreen. They nearly hit Ed, too. The tires shrieked as Tom missed Ed by bouncing up on the curb on the other side of the street. They jolted down again. He was still driving flat out. Polly supposed she must have turned round then, because she had another glimpse of Sam Rensky rolling over in the road, trying to get up and looking utterly astonished, before they screamed round a corner and she could see nothing but white cobweb shapes from the broken windscreen. This motherfucker turned their friend into a monster and made Mr. Lynn run him over. That is so mean. That is just fucking devious and rude and unnecessary. And I'm mad about it and I hate it. I didn't like Mr. Leroy this entire time, of course. But at this point, I'm straight up kill Mr. Leroy. I am team murder Leroy. I can't believe... Was it Sam and Ed all along? She said as they roared along. Not paper at all? I don't know, Tom said. I just don't know. What is it about us? We make things up and then they go and happen. I wrote you a letter, something very like this. Mr. Leroy uses them, Polly wanted to say, but there was more to it than that. She thought of Mr. Piper's shop in Stow-on-the-Water, which seemed to have nothing to do with Mr. Leroy. I don't know, she said wearily. Oh my God, you guys. I can't handle this. Will you really be all right? He said. I will now, Polly said, but what about you? You won't be able to give your concert if Sam's hurt, will you? Oh man. And then here's Mr. fucking Leroy. And Tom just shoves her onto the train, basically. And he's like screaming at Mr. Leroy as the train pulls away. And she's thinking to herself, yeah, you fucking should. And as she's riding home, like everything becomes more and more unreal, except for the part where Sam is hit by the car. That seems still very real in her mind. But the actual monster, it's almost like there's some magic there that makes it seem real in the moment and then in retrospect not anymore. Granny met her at Miles Cross with a taxi, which was just as well because Polly had a high temperature by then. Yeah, I would imagine. She's been a little stressed and out in the wilderness, basically. The concrete jungle. And I can't tell you, I laughed outright at this. Mr. Leroy made Sam Rensky look like a monster, she told Granny indignantly. Granny felt her forehead. I'm not surprised, she said. Oh my God, I shouted. I was just that. Granny knows something. Granny's living. She's fucking woke on this. Polly lay in bed and worried about Sam and Mr. Lynn. The flu got into her head the way flu does. By the time her temperature came down, she was really not clear what happened in Bristol. Sometimes she doubted her clear memory of Mr. Lynn's large hand squashing her face against his old anorak. Yeah. Granny said very little about what had happened. Polly only remembered one thing Granny said in the taxi. "I'm ashamed, Polly," Granny said. "Your Mr. Lynn behaved better than my Reg." And that was all she said. Granny seemed to take it for granted that Polly was living with her now. When Polly began to get up, she found that Granny had been round in a taxi and fetched her things from Ivy. I want her to have yelled at Ivy. Like, I doubt if she ever did that she'd ever tell Polly. If she yells at Ivy, the one that's going to tell Polly is Ivy, right? But, oh my God, there's something so, like, I just need somebody to scream at Ivy. I need somebody to do it. Does that ever happen? Don't spoil me. Don't tell me. But seriously, please somebody fucking bite her head off because I hate her. I hate her so much. Like, her father is totally despicable too, and I hate him as well, but I don't know him as well as Ivy. So Ivy is the one that's going to get the brunt of my hatred. And also the fact that, like, you know, he's an enormous neglectful coward, most definitely. But Ivy is actively trying to make Polly feel like this is her fault. She seems to believe it, which I just can't forgive. Reg is just a fucking coward, which, let's be honest, there are so many men like this. There are so many men like this. But Ivy, it's like there's so much more manipulation happening that it's just feels more of like an active evil with her. So finally she gets a note. It was written in clear, bold writing that she did not know. "Don't worry, Sam is made of rubber," and the show went on even though he was black and blue. "Love from us all, Anne." Polly was glad but quiet. She did not see how she would ever manage to see Mr. Lynn again. She felt quiet when she went back to Manor Road. It was rather embarrassing at first because everyone had thought she was leaving and was very surprised to see her. Fiona was the only person Polly explained to, and she did not tell even Fiona very much. Fiona was delighted to see Polly. "I'm glad you didn't leave," she said. "You'd have missed a right joke if you had. Look at Nina." Nina was into clothes and hairstyles as well as boys that term. She came to school in a shiny golden hat and purple spangled tights. She got herself new glamorous glasses. She experimented with false eyelashes. "I shall die," said Fiona, the day Nina's eyelashes slithered down inside her new glasses during biology and fell off onto a dissected frog. Oh my God, that is so great. I just love this. I love this so much because, like, yeah, there's no, I mean, if you are a girl who enjoys clothes and makeup and stuff, this is exactly what happens. You experiment with way too much as soon as you get the chance, and you make a right fool of yourself, like, several times. And that's not the last time you'll do it, but it all happens at once initially. So she distracts herself with some sports, and then we have this moment again where the narrative sort of pulls back and we go back into like the present Polly, where she's thinking about remembering all of this stuff. And it says, oddly enough, Polly remembered slodging. It seemed to be in both parts of her memory. So why had she not remembered her 13th birthday party? Granny said invite some friends. She knew Polly needed cheering up. Polly invited a number of people, including Fiona and Nina, and it turned out that Nina, as well as Granny, admired Fiona's red hair. With Polly's party as her excuse, Nina bought a packet of red hair dye and tried to dye her hair, but she forgot to read the instructions on the packet. The result was spectacular. For one whole day, Nina blazed through the school like someone's prized dahlia, red and sort of blonde and near black in streaks, with her hair in an enormous shock. Her mom met her at the school gates and marched her to a hairdresser. Nina arrived at Polly's party with almost no hair at all. That was, Polly knew, about the last time Nina's mom had any say in what Nina did. What made her forget that? And here was another thing Polly had all but forgotten. About a week later, right at the end of term, when Nina's hair was beginning to grow back, they all went on a school outing to the Cotswolds. It was a scorchingly hot day, and Mr. Partridge, who was in charge, began to look martyred before they even reached the Cotswolds. So they wind up going to the hardware store again. And she doesn't remember. So it feels like there's something with this magic that's keeping her from remembering the magic parts. Going to this hardware shop that she kind of made up, but apparently she didn't. And they go in there and they meet up with Leslie, who's still working there and who recognizes Polly, and they flirt with him outrageously. And then they get interrupted by the guy who looks like Tom. This guy is such a dickhead. "Are you girls wanting to buy anything?" Mr. Piper asked unpleasantly. "That I see. Then get out, all of you. I know you're kind. I'm not having girls like you in my shop." "We were only talking. There's no need to be so rude." "There's talk and talk, isn't there?" Mr. Piper said nastily. "Out." And on the way out, Nina says, 12:30, lunchtime, which in fact is not the time. And this is the signal to Leslie, because he says that he's going to this school near them and that he'll meet them out and they're about to like set a time when they get interrupted by Mr. Piper. So her saying this is a clear signal that this is when we're going to meet up next time. And it's really interesting to me that this guy who looks so much like Tom is just such a douchebag. And I like that Polly says she hated to think that she had, in some back to front way, half made Mr. Piper up. The likeness to Mr. Lynn made her feel sick. Yeah. And so then they get interrupted by their teacher, who's mad at them, wanting to know where the hell they've been this whole time because they wandered away from the group. And that's the end of the chapter. Pretty good timing, actually. I'm just under an hour. But yeah, this was a lot. Patricia, what are you doing to me? It's really good though, Patricia. I'm not sorry. Do you have any questions for me before I wrap this up? I'm just really curious what you, like, this must have been, I don't know. Part of me wants to be like, this must have been really upsetting to read as a kid, if you did read it as a kid. But then I'm like, things don't necessarily hit children the same way that they might hit an adult. It really depends. Yeah, this is just really a lot. Like I keep saying, I wasn't neglected in this way at all. It wasn't like this, but it still really hits me in certain spots, recognizing my own behavior and the way that I reacted and tried to excuse things and just, this was something as a kid I related to, unfortunately. Oh, that sucks. That sucks. I'm sorry. That's like just, you don't recover from that, You can like move on and do your best, but like that will fuck you up forever. The little things that happen to me that are remotely like this, like I feel like have fucked me up. And like I said, they weren't nearly so traumatic. So it kind of rolled off my back. Yeah, I guess that kind of is it, huh? Because it seems like, well, this isn't such a big deal. Whatever. That happens, right? Yeah, I get that. Yikes. Well, I really thank you for commissioning this. Like, I know I've said it already, but this has been one of my favorite things that I've read recently, honestly. Not just out of, like, the Spoil Me commissions, but from book club and everything. Like, I've just really enjoyed this, even though it's been brutally emotional. It's been so good. Like, it's just well done. I need to read more of Wynne Jones also, because she's just like, I loved Howl's Moving Castle. It was so good. So yeah, this was just, thank you so much. And again, thank you for rescheduling with me, because this was originally going to be on Saturday, but I messed up. So Patricia was very gracious in rescheduling with me for the evening. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to wrap up. And hopefully I will see you soon with the next 50 pages. And thank you all so much for listening. I implore you to read this. It's so good. And that's it. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.